All right, let's dive right into this explainer. Welcome back, everyone. Today, we are breaking down a really fascinating case study from the Office Drama Stories universe. And we're going to be specifically focusing on a situation that, honestly, tests the very fabric of corporate accountability. Now, we are looking at an incredibly tense scenario where a supposedly repaired, totally reformed office culture is put to the ultimate test. But here is the catch. It isn't tested by some massive, explosive scandal or, a screaming match in a boardroom. No, it is tested by something much quieter and, honestly, much more insidious. We're going to deconstruct a corporate mystery surrounding literally just a single document, a transfer request marked voluntary. But as we are absolutely going to uncover today, the employee in question never actually requested it.
So you really have to ask yourself what actually happens when corporate retaliation disguises itself as everyday administrative paperwork. The most dangerous workplace threats rarely storm into a room making demands or banging on a table. Instead, they sit quietly on a desk or buried deep in a digital inbox, looking exactly like boring, standard-issue paperwork. Think about it. When a toxic culture wants to remove a problem, especially an employee who happens to have protected status, they don't fire them publicly. That's too risky. Instead, they gently reassign them. They use the very machinery of human resources, the system that's supposed to protect people, to execute a quiet, practically invisible retaliation.
To catch these really subtle maneuvers, you have to adopt a very specific mindset. Maya Carter, the strategy lead, puts it absolutely perfectly. She says, the dangerous documents never look dangerous first. And she is spot on. Maya recognizes that after a company undergoes a major reform, the old toxic habits don't just magically vanish overnight. No way. They adapt. They put on a nice suit, they learn all the new empathetic HR vocabulary, and they just hide right in plain sight. Her core philosophy, which really anchors our whole explainer today, is that true corporate protection requires intense, uncompromising scrutiny of the completely mundane. If a document looks incredibly boring, well, that is exactly where you need to look closer.
Section 1. The Quiet Transfer Request, an Illusion of Safety.
Okay, let's set the scene. The company had just recently implemented these massive, sweeping reforms. They even rolled out a memory charter to ensure total transparency. Everyone really wanted the office to feel safe again. But, as we all know, reform is never proven by a fancy poster on a break room wall or a celebratory all-hands meeting. It is tested by the very first ordinary object that nobody wants to fully explain. In this specific case, an employee under protected status is suddenly being transferred, and the request is neatly, perfectly flagged as voluntary. And this is where those new reforms hit a brick wall. Look at the stark contrast here. On one side, you have the official corporate spin labeling this move an employee wellness accommodation. I mean, it sounds so caring, right? It sounds like the company is really looking out for their people's mental health. But on the other side, we have the messy, hidden truth. This specific employee had recently refused to withdraw a formal complaint. The incredibly polished, modern explanation of wellness is literally being weaponized to force physical distance between the employee and the problem they reported. Distance is basically being packaged and sold as resolution.
So, the absolutely crucial point here is understanding this specific tactic. We define this as quiet reassignment. Notice the soft language that gets weaponized by executives here. They use words like alignment, healing, and business continuity. And listen, this isn't accidental, not at all. This vocabulary is specifically, carefully designed to shut down any further questioning. Because think about the psychology of it. If you question a wellness accommodation, well, suddenly you look like the bad guy. You look like you're against an employee's healing. It is a brilliant, highly manipulative shield that allows old retaliatory habits to just reemerge right under the guise of modern empathetic management. It's retaliation wearing a smiley face.
Section 2. Reading the fine print, where the truth hides.
So, once Maya recognizes this pattern, she doesn't panic, she doesn't send off a fiery email, she and her team just sit down and begin reading the fine print. This is where Operations Coordinator Sofia Lane enters the picture, and I love her role in this. Sofia represents a really vital component in any healthy corporate ecosystem. She is the fresh eyes that haven't yet been trained by the company culture to just look away. She takes a purely procedural, completely unsentimental approach to dismantle this cover-up. Step 1, check the routing notes. Step 2, check the owner field. Step 3, check the small footnotes. Her greatest advantage is simply being new enough to still genuinely believe that rules and fine print are actually meant to be read. She hasn't yet learned which questions the old corporate culture considers, inconvenient. She treats the HR document like a literal treasure map.
And because she treats it that way, she asks the seemingly simple but absolutely devastating question: can we define who changed it,
when it changed, and who approved the change. Boom. This is the exact, precise, uncomfortable question that the old corporate culture actively avoids answering with a real name. The old guard, they want to talk about synergy and optics and vibes. Sofia? She just wants to know whose literal digital fingerprint is on the approval button. She completely refuses to let the process remain vague, and in corporate mysteries, vagueness is always the enemy of accountability.
Section 3. Building the proof map, connecting the logs.
Now we get to the really fun part. Maya doesn't chase people, she follows systems. People will lie, people will deny things, and systems might occasionally glitch, but records speak. Look at how this timeline completely fuses together to build an airtight, undeniable case. First, we have Nina Ross, an executive assistant, pulling background drafts and booked calendars. Then we have Jordan Price, the IT audit specialist, digging into the server and pulling raw access logs that show altered system fields. And finally, the absolute smoking gun, a manager-only template was submitted. The entire fairy tale of a voluntary transfer completely, spectacularly falls apart when the timeline definitively proves the employee didn't even have access to the template used to initiate their own supposed move.
I absolutely love this quote from Jordan Price. It hits the nail on the head. When some of the higher-ups try to challenge him, claiming that logs need interpretation or that he's jumping to conclusions, Jordan just calmly replies, "This is not suspicion, this is sequence." That is a real game changer. It brilliantly removes all the messy emotional arguments right out of the equation. When you are dealing with a toxic work environment, manipulative leaders will always try to make you seem paranoid or emotional or crazy for digging into things. But raw data, access records, timestamps, they neutralize that completely. You aren't accusing anyone of a grand conspiracy, you are simply reading the chronological sequence of events that the server faithfully recorded.
And this brings us to a brilliant, often completely overlooked detail in corporate investigations. Background work still has foreground records. The executives orchestrating this quiet reassignment genuinely thought they were being invisible. They thought they were being ghosts. But invisible work still requires booking conference rooms. It requires scheduling private one-on-one calls. It requires printing out draft versions of documents. As Nina rightfully notes, people who treat administrative tasks as invisible completely forget that those very systems capture absolutely everything. The truth isn't found in some cinematic, fast-typing computer hack. It's usually found in the boring visitor logs and the calendar receipts.
Section 4. Confronting the cover-up. Soft language versus hard evidence.
So all of this builds up, and we finally enter the formal boardroom review. This is where the official, polite narrative violently clashes with the hard, compiled data. Executives like Adrian Vale, whose absolute main priority is company efficiency, even if it literally means erasing a protected employee, immediately deploy highly predictable cover-up tactics. First, they try to reframe factual inconsistencies as mere clutter. Then they try to disguise their pressure as career advice, warning the investigative team not to turn a quote-unquote small issue into a massive crisis. They soften their verbs. They aggressively appeal to the optics of the situation, suggesting that truly good leaders know when to just stop asking questions for the sake of the company's overall stability. They essentially try to turn the entire meeting into a piece of theater where everyone is just supposed to perform a polite, compliant version of themselves. But then, Aisha Morgan, an analyst with those crucial fresh eyes, just cuts right through that thick corporate fog. The executives are trying so hard to move the room away from hard facts and into the realm of feelings and company loyalty. But Aisha pulls it right back to the record with a completely room-shrinking question. Who benefits if this stays classified as harmless? Oh man, that question completely changes the gravity of the entire room. It instantly demands accountability and pinpoints the hidden motive. With that one question, procedure is no longer allowed to be a convenient hiding place for bad actors.
And here we are at the climactic moment. Maya calmly places the hard proof right beside the executive's official explanation. One page closes one excuse. One timestamp closes another. She completely traps the executives in their very own system. She isn't standing there asking for blind faith. She is literally forcing them to look at the unchangeable logs their own software generated. The reveal is absolute and undeniable. The request was generated from a manager-only template. It was, without a shadow of a doubt, retaliation, simply disguised as a wellness accommodation. Checkmate.
Section 5. Fixing the broken system. Beyond private apologies.
Now, you might think the story ends there, but stopping one single retaliatory transfer isn't nearly enough. The actual vulnerability in the software had to be structurally closed. If they just stopped at saving this one employee, the system itself would remain broken. So, HR manager Linda Park steps up and implements a permanent fix. Let's look at the before and after. Before this incident, voluntary transfers could actually be initiated via a manager-only template, which created a completely invisible administrative move. After the fix, the system is hard-coded to require direct, multi-factor employee confirmation before any transfer can ever be labeled voluntary again. Furthermore, they instituted a mandatory protected movement review. The actual vulnerability in the workflow has been permanently and structurally closed.
And guys, this right here is the absolute core lesson about institutional memory. A private fix makes executives comfortable, but it leaves all future employees completely exposed. If they had just, quietly canceled this one transfer and let the manager off with a stern warning behind closed doors, the loophole would still be right there, just waiting for the next target. True corporate repair absolutely must outlive the meeting where it was discussed. It has to be permanently written into the process, and that process must leave footprints that everyone can see.
Maya's directive during this fallout is incredibly powerful. She says, do not quietly fix what can publicly teach. By absolutely refusing the easy, private fix and instead forcing a highly visible control into the daily workflow, the team managed to turn a moment of massive corporate failure into a lasting educational standard for the entire company. Because the reality is, a workplace does not become safe just because brave people keep having to heroically rescue the truth every Tuesday. No, it becomes safe when the systems are built so well that the truth no longer needs permission to appear.
Which brings us to the ultimate takeaway from today's explainer. The record did not raise its voice. It simply waited for someone patient enough to read it. Safe workplaces, true accountability, and healthy professional boundaries aren't forged through dramatic shouting matches in corner offices. They are forged through meticulous, undeniable, and honestly sometimes tedious documentation. The boring paperwork is the real battlefield.
So I want to leave you with this final, truly provocative thought. Take a hard look at your own systems, your own logs, your own boring paperwork at your job. How does your own workplace handle invisible conflicts? Are things like wellness accommodations and team alignments potentially hiding something much deeper and darker? Remember, the truth is almost always there in the sequence, just patiently waiting for someone to read the fine print. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and remember, always keep your eyes on the record.